Well, welcome everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button.
I remember in middle school when you felt self-conscious if you were the last one to go through puberty. That really went topsy-turvy, didn't it?
Sometimes the Hasbara, it's too much explaining yourself and it's too apologetic.
Be sure to hit the notifications bell.
I actually do believe Israel won't just bomb countless civilians.
Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this up on your Facebook.
You have to be kind to people. Being kind is the guys in this mess in the first place.
Put this up on your Reddit.
Chile is a country.
Be sure to cut and paste, a link to this to go into your favorite Facebook chat group.
It's good to see so many normal people in here.
Now, spanking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere.
Put this on WhatsApp. Put this on Telegram. Put this on your favorite messenger app.
Hello and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. And, well, it continues to be quite a fucking week. Last night, after going on stream, I decided to just have a look over at the Twitter feed of Michael C. Rappaport. Because I was just kind of curious. I wanted to just put my reaction video in the thread where he posted the original. And he actually described that video we looked at yesterday with the dump box and the great fucking epic bit where the whole thing was like pretending not to know Mahmoud Khalil's name and just all sorts of just wonderful, just aneurysmally racist shit. And he goes, I think this is some of my best work. And really, the sad thing is, I also think it is some of his best work, like all time, because the standard really isn't very high. So, yeah. And then I look in the fucking, the replies, and half of it is like, just straight up Nazis applauding him and be like, see, he's almost taken the red pill, and it's like, Michael, is that what you were going for? The fact that you're being applauded by Nazis? Maybe it is. I mean, like, a lot of Zionists are actually kind of cool with being applauded by Nazis. But if it's not, it would be a good time to kind of take stock of that and say, what the fuck did I do to end up here? And the answer is, well, you decided to reboot your career by becoming a genocide cheerleader. And that was not a great choice that you made there. I mean, on any fucking level. So I ended up going over to Rappaport's page, actually, his YouTube channel, see what else is going on. And there's some choice crap in there. I also just went over to the Young Turfs to see what kind of normal one they're having. Also got Graham Linehan remembering the horrible, just anti-Semitic serial abuser TERF Magdalene Burns with, I guess, her sister. I think we're gonna start out with some of the Young Turfs, actually. Here we go. Here, I mean,
Republican.
One of the things that we just, when we talk about the when we talk about the crew over at Poly Market Studios, they actually fucking, what, Ben Glebe is still there. They didn't fire that motherfucker? Seriously? That genocidal fuck who was allegedly also involved in the fascist attacks on the UCLA anti-genocide encampment, he's still working for them? Wow. Zdravie.
Republicans are continuing their culture war campaign against the transgender community. Now, 2 Republican lawmakers in Arkansas have introduced a bill that...
Like, why... I mean, why... What the fuck is the thinking here with having him talk about this? Okay, first of all, let's just remember that the fucking... Their whole thing, they are very much responsible for creating sort of the political cover that allows people to back this sort of thing. The Young Turfs are. But then you have, like, genocidal laws against trans people. And a guy who cheerleads genocide against Palestinians is the one who's going to talk about them? Like, what kind of fucking crossover episode is this? Jesus Christ.
that targets hairdressers and barbers who give gender non-conforming haircuts to kids. The legislation is called House Bill 1668, known as the Vulnerable Youth Protection Act.
Yeah, and that's the thing. This is why anytime you see any law that sounds really innocuous, like, it is a name that just sounds like it obviously must be a good thing. It's almost certainly not going to be. Like, here, the idea is that the abusive parents of trans kids, or kids they think might be trans, can sue anyone who in some way assists in social transition, which can just be like getting a haircut that is somehow considered non-conforming according to no specified standard. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, and I mean, the way they call it, this could be the dumbest anti-trans bill ever. Yeah, yeah, meanwhile, motherfucker, people are living in terror over this stuff. More than 250,000 people have had to flee their home states. That was just in the first months of this onslaught. I mean, now people are having to think about getting the hell out of the country because now the entire country isn't fucking safe. I mean, yes, it is ridiculous. It is an absolutely absurd fucking clown car idea of a bill. But it is also intended to sow terror amongst a marginalized population. A marginalized population that is worth noting the Young Turfs threw under the bus a long time ago. And it is just really kind of obscene that the people who go and propose this sort of shit can just go about their lives afterwards. You know, they just go in there, okay, let's see how we can ruin trans people's lives today. Let's see if we can get the suicide attempt rate up. You know, it's well over like 60% now. Why? See if we can get it up to like 70, 75. I got a bill that'll probably do that. And then they introduce the bill and then they just fucking go home and they go about their business and they go about their day. And everybody knows who they are, and like that's fucked up, actually. Like, that should not be something where you can just go on with your life. You should actually have to become a recluse after that, because everywhere you go you got people telling you to go fuck yourself because you're a genocidal fuck. I mean, and much of the same thing can be said of Ben Glebe, actually. Because he's a genocidal fuck, too, just not on this particular issue. Although, if he's with the Young Turfs, that says that he is certainly willing to indulge in a little state terror against trans people as a treat.
Here's the context. The Vulnerable Youth Protection Act was introduced by Republican Rep. Mary Bentley and Senator Alan Clark. If passed, legislation would allow parents to sue anyone who supports a minor's gender transition. And that goes beyond just surgical or medical interventions. Like, I personally don't think that a minor should be medically transitioning.
Yeah, fuck you. Yeah, fuck you, actually. You don't get to personally think that. In fact, you don't get to personally think anything, motherfucker. You personally don't think that people in Gaza should be allowed to eat. So, honestly, why should anyone give a fuck what you think about, like, the medical treatment of trans people? Like, where did you get the idea that you have a valid opinion on this? You're nobody on this issue. You're like less qualified to talk about this shit than Hillary Cass, and Hillary Cass is utterly unqualified to talk about this shit. Like,
in any sort of irreversible way on account of the undeveloped brains that all minors have. But the bill defines social transitioning.
See, this undeveloped brain shit is something you got to watch out for, because you have, like, transphobes are using that to say, well, maybe we should move back the minimum age for transition to 25, because the brain, that's when the brain's fully developed. Except here's the thing about your brain. The thing about your brain is it's always developing in all sorts of ways. It's always changing. I mean, that's why there's a whole area of study in neurosciences called brain plasticity. Because our brains are constantly developing. So, like, the minute you say shit like this, I mean, first of all, it's just nonsense. Because the thing is, I mean, trans people tend to know they're trans very, very early on. If they have the vocabulary to talk about it, they will articulate it. If they don't, they just sort of quietly try to figure out what the hell's going on. But, I mean... yeah, so shut the fuck up, Ben Glebe.
As any act in which a minor adopts a gender identity different from their biological sex. And that includes clothing choice.
Like, okay, so wait a second. So, of course, they're not going to define biological sex, which they would have to. Which means the thing is... Here's the thing about social transition, especially in minors, you know, who haven't been through any kind of puberty yet. Social transition is literally just, changing clothes, using a different name, different pronouns, maybe a different haircut. And the thing is, the only way to avoid liability, that literally means that you would have to verify the biological sex of every kid that you come in contact with. Given the definition of biological sex what we're talking about is that this law, if it were to pass and be upheld by the courts, and I mean, it's fucking Arkansas. I do not hold much hope for the fucking courts there, or anywhere in the U.S., to be honest. The Ninth Circuit just dealt a huge blow to trans people. But, like, what you'd have to do in order to protect yourself from liability under this fucked up law is actually, I mean, child sex abuse. Because you'd have to verify their so-called biological sex. That's how fucked up this thing is. Somehow, every single time that somebody introduces one of these bills, it turns out that if you actually look at it and look at what it requires, it involves some fucking stuff that will get you on a sex offender registry. It involves requiring you to do some shit that will put you on a sex offender registry in order to comply with the law. So, I mean, this is the stuff that the Young Turfs defend. It's worth noting. Well, they're not defending this one. They found, like, this is where they apparently draw the line.
Voices, pronouns, hairstyle, name, which is insane. Under this definition, a barber, a teacher, or a guidance counselor could face lawsuits for supporting a child's gender identity. And that does nothing but make the child's mental health even worse.
Yeah, that's the fucking point, Ben. That's the point. Yeah, of course it's going to make the kid's mental health worse. These motherfuckers know that it makes trans people's mental health worse when you subject them to fucking state terror. They want trans people to die. You're not telling them something that will make them reconsider. The people who propose this stuff, they know perfectly well what they're doing. What's interesting is that when the people who sort of just go along with it because they haven't given it any thought, those people can, there was an interesting case of this. People who follow, subject themselves to fucking the young TERFs on a regular basis will know that Cenk likes to claim that trans people in sports is just a third-rail issue and you just can't even broach it. You shouldn't even try to make an argument because he doesn't like it and he doesn't want it to be a thing. He wants to ban trans people in being in sports, even though trans people have been allowed to be in sports for decades. Literal decades. It's never been an issue. So in Utah, there was a trans sports ban that was passed, and the right-wing Utah Republican governor vetoed it and issued a statement saying, just look at what the actual stakes of this thing is. We're talking about something that affects maybe a handful of people in the entire state, and it's going to ruin the lives of a whole lot of marginalized people who are already having really fucking hard lives. That's how easy that was. Somebody talked to this guy about what the actual stakes were. He said, holy shit, I don't want to be associated with anything like that. And he vetoed it. This is a right-wing Republican who was able to be talked out of this thing that Cenk says you can't talk anybody out of and you shouldn't try.
And when going through a difficult time trying to express themselves. The punishment, it allows for lawsuits to be filed up to 20 years after an incident. I know it says
20
15
years after an incident. How the hell are you even going to prove it at that point? Wait, no, it says up to 15 years. Fucking read your title cards, Ben. Or proofread your title cards.
in there, and I read the actual text of the bill, and it says 20 years in the actual text. So it's between 15 and 20, I believe it's 20, with damages ranging from $10,000 to $10 million in cases where a minor received gender-affirming care. But here's the headshot. Just by the way, randomly going to show this to you for Rep. Mary Bentley, who introduced the bill.
Yeah, I mean, again, clearly her name and portrait should be written in shit all over the place. Because, I mean, look at that little smile of hers. Because she's thinking of dead trans people.
For the record, she does seem to have a gender non-conforming haircut. That's the exact haircut that I currently have.
Well, I mean, no, she doesn't really. And this is why this is such bullshit. Because these standards change so often. Like, especially when it comes to what is, like, gender conforming for girls and women. Like, I mean, in fact, this is a point that was made in some bills related to shit like this in Montana that caused a bunch of, otherwise, horrible transphobic Republicans to cross over and vote down a bill they were totally ready to vote for. Because the thing is, pretty much everything that women wear today would be considered gender non-conforming, just as little as 20, 30 years ago.
Right now, and have had for most of my life. So that really, that should be outlawed. She should be prosecuted, as should her barber, I think, under her own legislation.
I don't think she has a barber.
Arkansas has been a leader in legislative efforts restricting transgender rights. In 2021, it became the first state to ban gender-affirming care for minors, a law that was struck down by a federal judge in 2023. Since then, more than 24 states have enacted similar...
Yeah, and the Young Turfs has been at the forefront of making this palatable to fucking liberals.
Measures limiting medical care, sports participation, and bathroom access for transgender people. The bill is still moving through the Arkansas legislature and is expected to face immediate legal challenges if passed into law. Critics argue the bill...
I mean, that's nowhere near enough, though.
...violates First Amendment rights and is designed to intimidate teachers, doctors, even parents from...
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it very clearly is designed to do that. I mean, saying that if you give a kid who may or may not be trans, you have no way of knowing, below a certain age... that, you know, give them the haircut they want, their parents 20 fucking years later can sue you for like $10 million? Because you did not fucking, you know, CSA them in order to verify their fucking bullshit biological sex? Like, what the fuck? Yeah, of course, this is very obviously meant to intimidate people.
Supporting transgender and gender nonconforming youth. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, of Arkansas has condemned it as state-mandated bullying. I'm curious your thoughts, Mark Thompson.
Well, I don't get the trans thing from the start.
Well, that's how we know that you're on the Young Turfs.
Being used as a political ploy, it's such a horrible... I mean, I understand why it's effective, I mean, clearly, but it's such a...
But it isn't effective is the thing. That's the wild thing about this. You look at it, it polls like shit. It does not help anyone get elected. This is not something that there is some big grassroots demand anywhere in the society for. Everybody was kind of cool with this, either, you know, with you know, they didn't really notice that there were trans people because you can go through your entire life and not actually meet one, because there are not that many trans people. Or, you know, they just didn't give a fuck, or they were, like, cool with trans people and they just want trans people to live their lives, or whatever. But it does not, there was no, like, grassroots demand for this. This is very much a ruling class thing. And what we're increasingly seeing is that it is a bipartisan ruling class thing. Like Sarah McBride is now saying, you know, that the Democrats really ought to welcome people who want trans people to die, at least in certain ways.
A horrible abuse of a microscopic population compared to the general population in America, and the idea that they could, the right could run on it and continue to pound the drum like this.
Well, the reason they can do that is because there's no pushback. That is the entire reason. If there is pushback on this, then this suddenly becomes something that can hurt them. But when there's no pushback, it can't hurt them. It's like it's like the genocide in Gaza. There was no pushback in the political class anywhere. And so the result was that it could not actually really harm the chances of anyone. I mean, except whoever happened to be most likely to win otherwise. But it was not, they managed to make it a non-issue as a result because everybody was on the wrong side of that. I mean, and now the Democrats are trying to do that with fucking trans rights as well.
This is the biggest issue. Everybody gets up every day and they're just trans people everywhere and they're wanting to transition too early and they're wearing this weird haircut, whatever it is. I mean, it's absurd. And yet it takes up so much media oxygen, and it's been...
That's not the problem. God, it takes up so much media oxygen. Are we going to talk about the harm for the people who are affected?
Such an effective tool, and as I say, it's abusive. I mean, I don't know anything about this trans community in a way that really gives me a...
Then why the fuck... Yeah, I mean, and the reason we have this panel is because all of the trans people who at one point worked on TYT have left because of, like, Anna-transphobia and Jenk's complete shittiness on trans rights. This is why we've got, like, why the fuck are we having a panel discussion? What's the point of a panel discussion made up of people who are not in any way going to be affected by anything like this and who, by their own admission, don't even know anything about it?
Perspective, but my heart breaks for those people who are legitimately trying to find themselves in
okay, I spoke too soon. He does get into that because, and good. I mean, it should. I mean, it should be fucking heartbreaking.
In a world that is increasingly so hostile to them. So I really mean it. My heart breaks for them. So I kind of bring that to this conversation, and I just find both the absurdity of it and also the cruelty of it. Yeah,
thank you, actually. I mean, of course, Ben Glebe looks at absurdity and cruelty and says, oh, well, I mean, as long as it's happening to Palestinians, it's cool.
Be honest.
I imagine, like, the way that conservatives in America imagine the world is just something out of a South Park episode. Like, all the DEI planes are crashing, even though that...
Yeah, I mean, actually, South Park, like, the more fucking... I don't know who this guy is, but I think it's actually literally the other way around. You look at the more, like, explicitly political episodes of South Park, and a lot of them are just, like, the way right-wingers think the world is, or at least pretend to think the world is.
It started happening in abundance when Trump won. There's just, the irony is endless, you know what I'm saying? Like, some black person flying a plane, it's going down, everybody's trans, everybody's, like, super gay, you know, skipping through the street.
Yeah, I mean, like, South Park was absolute dog shit when it came to trans issues. It was absolutely one of them, just absolutely horrible on the subject.
With rainbow clothes on. And these people, like, most of the people who hold these sentiments,
this guy?
like, they live in,
I'm
like,
not familiar with
Oklahoma or Idaho, and they, like, never see these things at all. So it's just like, if this is
Jackson
such a,
White. Okay,
you know,
not familiar with
intricate, well thought, well planned out conspiracy, then why is, like, half of a percentage point of the population trans? Why can't you could just leave these people alone, but you...
Yeah, you absolutely could leave these people alone, but, I mean, they're shitheads. they're shitheads, and so they don't want to leave these people alone. They want to hurt them. And Cenk and Anna both tend to agree with that, actually.
You know, then if you did that, you would have to actually talk about real issues like wages.
Oh, fuck off. This is a real issue. This is like life and death for a whole lot of people. That's a real issue. The fact that the number of people who are being targeted is relatively small because it is a small segment of the population does not make it not a real issue. And you can't talk about this stuff you can't meaningfully talk about economic issues without talking about this, because this is an economic issue. Like these bathroom bans and all that shit. That actually basically bans trans people from the workplace. In fact, Trump's like EEOC person is on a whole fucking warpath trying to actually, that's a fucked up word to be using. Sorry about that. Okay, this is actually much more fitting. It was the word I was going to use. I mean, a crusade, because a crusade is a fucking genocidal campaign that is celebrated by two groups of people who don't know what it was and people who suck, to get trans people banned from the workplace. So, I mean, when we're talking about wages and working conditions and stuff like that, I mean, that trans people are overwhelmingly working class, and they're trying to target trans people's access to employment. So, like, it is a fucking real issue for trans people. The issue is that motherfuckers want to, like, ruin trans people's lives.
And benefits and things like that, which, of course, these people have no interest in doing. And that's why you see...
Well, I mean, none of them do. I mean, that's not just the Republicans. The Democrats don't want to talk about that shit either, because they're against doing anything to improve that, too.
This all over Fox and all the right-wing outlets. I mean, obviously, it is a real culture war issue. Like, people in the streets really are concerned about this.
No, I mean, like, people in the streets are concerned about the attack on trans people, yeah. But, like, there really is no grassroots, like, demand for these fucking laws.
To no real, you know, it doesn't make sense that they are, but they are. But a lot of the reason is because the media that they consume won't stop talking about it. Because, again, if they do...
And this isn't just a right-wing media thing. I mean, like, right-wing media in terms of, like, movement Republican media. Just to be clear, I mean, pretty much all the dominant media are right-wing. I mean, like, the New York Times has been constantly publishing anti-trans propaganda. You know, The Atlantic has been doing that. You know, one of the, like, leading sort of journals of, like, people who are proud of the fact that they are literate.
Do stop talking about it, then they'll have to be substantive, and they're not interested in that.
This is substantive. Like, fuck you. I mean, this is a life and death thing here. And, I mean, one of the things you have to understand as well is this is part of an overall game plan. Trans people aren't the end of it. What happened was, if you go back to 2016, to the Values Voter Summit, which is where all sorts of reactionary ghouls get together to talk about how to do reactionary shit. And a shithead called Meg Kilgannon got up there and gave a speech about how they just needed to accept that they had lost on the gay marriage thing, that they had lost on gay rights and, you know, cis queer people's rights, and move on to trans people, to breaking the T away from the LGB. And they said that this was necessary because it was the only way to actually weaken the solidarity, you know, and weaken that target group in order to be able to get, you know, start attacking cis queer people's rights and acceptance in society. And she specifically said what they needed to do was create fake feminist groups and make fake feminist arguments about supposed, you know, women's spaces, and, you know, popularize the idea of limiting, like, women's rights under the law to what they called sex-based rights.
So,
yeah, I think that is true, and it is overpushed for the amount of the population it is. I don't think it's necessarily, in my opinion, accurate to say that there's no reason for people to be concerned, because I've heard many instances.
Oh, fuck you. Yeah, I mean,
of children at schools where they are being exposed to things at an earlier age than they should ever be exposed to.
What things? What things?
Any sort of gender ideology, let alone.
Yeah, fuck you. Like, yeah, really. Fuck Ben Glebe.
On one side or the other. And so I think
like, what the hell? What do you mean gender ideology, Ben Glebe?
At our peril, act as though it never exists. Sometimes it does. We just need to have a common sense middle.
Well, okay, so give a fucking example then, Ben, if sometimes it does. Why don't you tell us one actual case of the thing that you're talking about that explains why we need to be concerned about it?
Ground when it comes to these issues, where we can respect everybody and find a way that we can
We'll respect everybody but Palestinians, who Ben wants to exterminate. Okay, so yeah, that, Jesus, I did not expect to see fucking Ben Glebe on there. I thought they just had him on there to be racist against Palestinians, but apparently they bring him on here to be shitty about other things too. Okay. Okay, I think we're going to... Let's see, where is it?
All of this,
Gonna look at some Caleb Muppet. Staying on the Revolutionary Road. Like, staying, because they were already on it.
Russians fighting for the peoples of Donbass, the Syrian people suffering in the aftermath of the overthrow of their anti-imperialist government. All of this points to how important it is to build a revolutionary organization.
Yes. But the point is, like, you're not doing that.
In the United States. And building a revolutionary organization in these times, building an organization of people that are willing to fight for a government of action that will
Oh, here we go.
fight for working families. Building an organization that will oppose the danger of a new
Why is he dressed like Tony Soprano?
world war and oppose the emerging low-wage police state. Is not
What emerging? That shit emerged a long time ago. Why is he acting like this stuff's in the future? Why is he talking to us like he's talking to us from 1994?
not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult.
I mean, especially if you're actually just a really shitty cult leader.
But we do it, and we have a growing organization right now.
It's very easy to be a growing organization when your membership is very small.
Is growing. We have 3 functioning locals. We've got people joining us. I hope that you will
Functioning is doing a lot of work here.
become a member right now. If you join, your first month of membership is free. After that, we will begin charging you $15 a month. Not much.
Wait, no, it's flat? Like, okay, my dues in the IWW are actually, it's like, are on a sliding scale, specifically because they want the working class to have access to it, and they know the working class doesn't have a whole lot of money, and they want to be able to meet people where they are. And so, there's a sliding scale of dues. From like, it's like the average default is like $11. You can also, if you're without an income, you can actually reduce that down to, I think, 0. So, but he's just doing a straight $15.
But I hope you will sign up and become a member. And building a revolutionary movement is not just difficult on the mass scale. It is also
well, I mean, especially when all you've got is like 30 people.
Difficult on the individual and personal scale, for reasons that we're going to talk about tonight.
Once again, like, does he understand about how focus is supposed to work? Why is he out of focus and his bookshelf is in focus?
Tonight, we're going to have a conversation about how to stay.
Wow, this looks so fucking revolutionary with all the fucking American flags and all the white people
on the revolutionary road. So here we go. How to stay on the revolutionary road.
How are humans different from animals? Humans are animals.
How are humans different from animals? What is it that separates human beings from animals? Well, according to Frederick Engels.
What is Friedrich? God, why does he do this? But, I mean, the thing about this quote, I mean, is it is not necessary. If I were going to go with things of his that have aged really well, this isn't one of them, because the thing is, you can point to examples of animals that change their environment in, like, very systematic sorts of ways. Like, I mean, look at what beavers do. Beaver dams are actually very complex things. Hey, Riveroon.
All planned action of animals has never succeeded in impressing the stamp of their will upon the earth. That was left for man. In short, the animal merely uses...
I mean, we are animals, though.
...its environment and brings about changes in it simply by its presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his end and masters it. And this is the final distinction between man and other animals. And once again, it is labor that brings about this distinction.
Yeah, I mean, and it really just breaks down very quickly the minute you start looking at counterexamples.
Human beings force our will.
So, I mean, what's wild about this is, just with no introduction, this is how he always is with quotes. It's like, he'll just, like, smack a quote on you that he half understands, without any context. How do we stay on the revolutionary road? Well, here's what Engels said about people and animals.
Onto the world around us. We are creative. We are innovators. We take the world around us and we force it to serve us. And we don't simply interact with it like animals interact with their ecosystem. We force the world around to change. We improve the world around us. We are creative. We are a creative species. That's what defines us. And that is why we are innovationists. We celebrate this beautiful aspect of the...
He's trying to actually come up with a definition for innovationist. Yeah, see, for anyone who's watching who hasn't been following the Muppet saga in recent months, he decided that he was getting tired of pretending to be a communist, because then communists would be like, but he's not one. And everyone's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, here's what he stands for. And everyone was like, wow, yeah, he really isn't one, is he? Why does he pretend to be a communist then? Oh, because he's an asshole. And so he decided he was going to stop pretending to be a communist, and did a video explaining it, in which he basically said that the reason he wanted to get away from communism is because it's Jewish. Seriously. And now he calls himself an innovationist, which means fucking nothing, because he wants maximum flexibility on these things.
Species. And that we understand...
Here, check this out. Imperialism/globalism. This is a thing. This isn't a new thing. What he's doing there is treating the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of fascists as the same thing as like an analysis of imperialism.
And that the whole history of human civilization is human beings reinventing.
He's done this bit so many fucking times. It's amazing to me when I watch him that somehow when he doesn't plan his remarks, they are more structured than when he does. I mean, what the hell? Usually, one of the things they tell you to do when public speaking and writing is you want to give people some introduction that gives you some idea where you're going to take them and why. And instead, he just goes, here's a Friedrich Engels quote. And now we're going to look at... Wait. Oh, he's saying that innovationism is a level of human civilization? He is the highest... This is... I mean, it may not look like it, but this is peak performance of humanity right here. Caleb Maupin. So you go from hunter-gatherer civilization to slavery to feudalism to capitalism to imperialism and globalism. He left off the three brackets around it, but... And then to innovationism.
How it is they force the environment to serve them, reinventing their relationship with nature, and doing so in a more efficient way to increase the population.
See, and what he's done there as well, this is just like the sort of canned human development cycle of historical materialism, except at the top it's supposed to say like communism. Except he's replaced it now with innovationism, which he's never come up with a fucking definition for.
To increase living standards, to make life more comfortable, to increase the life expectancy. And that first we were hunter-gatherers. Then from there we moved toward domesticating animals, and we had slavery. Then from there we had feudalism. And then from there we had capitalism. And then capitalism moved into the stage of imperialism.
Except imperialism is part of capitalism. We didn't abandon capitalism for imperialism. Imperialism is where capitalism was always fucking headed. And actually, in a lot of ways, where it started.
Globalism, or the monopolistic system that we live under now. And that ultimately, to overturn and defeat globalism and imperialism, we need...
So he's saying we don't live under capitalism.
To give birth to innovationism, a system where with a planned economy, with a government of action, we can unleash human growth to even higher levels.
Okay, that's innovation. So, wait a second, let me play that back.
Of action, we can unleash human growth where with a planned economy, with a government of action, we can unleash human growth to even higher levels.
Like, that doesn't actually mean anything, but okay.
By getting rid of the irrationality of prophets in command, we can...
What's interesting, he doesn't say getting rid of the irrationality of prophets. He just says the irrationality of prophets in command. So there's still prophets, so it's still capitalism.
And allow human growth and creativity and innovation to soar to even greater heights, and eventually build a world with wealth and abundance for all, in which poverty is eradicated, in which people can live a comfortable life.
I mean, like, a year ago, he would be saying this was communism. Which it isn't. Let me just be clear, it isn't. But now he's just, he's just, like, done a global find replace, and now every place where he ever talked about communism, he just calls it innovationism.
And live and just do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs.
Like, that's literally all he's doing.
Where there is so much abundance of wealth.
He hasn't changed anything about what he's saying. He just came up with this bullshit name for it in order to, like, a new bullshit name for it in order to replace the old bullshit name for it.
There is so much technological advancement that people only really have to work because they feel like it. A society where there's really no inequality because there's enough for everybody. A society in which there's really no need for a government because there's no need for coercion. We want to unleash human creative power.
Like, I mean, this is literally all he's done is change the name.
A higher plane, and that ultimate higher plane is innovationism, and the ideology that understands this trajectory.
I mean, this is word for, I mean, seriously, this is word for word.
Called innovationism.
What he said other times before he decided to rebrand.
At the Center for Political Innovation, we are innovationists.
Oh, I mean, okay, this is neat. Because he used to distance himself from Dugin at the same time as including on his YouTube channel the speech he gave to Dugin and an assembled group of Russian and French fascists. And now he's, like, just specifically mentioning Dugin.
Now, the system that we currently live under is called imperialism globalism.
No, it isn't.
And there are three ways to understand this system. The first...
There are 4 ways listed.
Is when Henry Charles Carey, he wrote about the American system versus the English system. And he described the monopolistic practices of the British Empire that were holding back development and impoverishing people around the world in order to enrich the London Stock Exchange. And he argued that the American Revolution, the theories of Alexander Hamilton and others that favored economic development, were the opposite.
No, but they weren't. I mean, that's the thing. They really weren't. And this is such a random fucking collection here. So we've got Henry Charles Carey. We've got Lenin. No Marx anywhere on here. Just Lenin. And then we've got Dugin. And then we've got whatever the hell. What is the Atlanticist pathology? Is that... Did he forget the author? Or is that just a thing he said? It is a chapter of his shitty city builder book.
And Henry Charles Carey wrote about the English system versus the American system. Later, Vladimir Lenin talked about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and talked about how bankers were becoming dominant over industrialists. He talked about how the export of capital was becoming primary and how there was an international financial oligarchy that was emerging, and it was keeping countries impoverished and holding back development around the world. They were carving out the world with what they call territorial partition, and that as a result of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, that Africa, Asia, and Latin America were being impoverished, and that war was breaking out as a way of redividing the world among the imperialists, etc. So Lenin had his concept of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Now, Increasingly around the world, there's talk of geopolitics, and geopolitics talks about
that's not a new thing. We've been talking about geopolitics forever.
How geography and the nature of the land and our relationship with geographic formations affects our politics. And in Russia, Alexander Dugin, who is a geopolitical thinker, talked about the history.
He's also the guy who invented Nazbols.
Of Atlanticism, or civilizations of the sea, and Eurasianism, civilizations of the land.
Which is, I mean, this is already just nonsense.
And how civilizations of the sea build up mighty militaries and navies, and they seek to control trade routes. And they build.
I mean, see, and here's where it already breaks down, because one of the things Russia has, like, historically always been trying to do, like their strategy. I'm talking about like Imperial Russia now, Tsarist Russia, and I mean into this Soviet period, and has always been trying to find warm water ports in order to actually have a place to base their like naval and merchant fleets.
Highly individualistic and highly militaristic societies.
Unlike Russia, which is not at all militaristic.
Hold back development, and they plunder, loot, and they concentrate it in one mighty city. The Roman Empire was a great example of this, and the British Empire and the modern Western imperialist financial system are Atlanticism, civilization of the sea.
I mean, this makes no sense.
Whereas civilizations of the land, empires.
Although for anyone keeping track, I think this is the most open, like, acknowledgement of his, like, ideological debt to modern Russian fascism.
And societies that are formed on great land masses develop in a different way. And the history of Chinese civilization, which is mostly...
Speaking of a country that has a long history of seafaring.
On the land is different because you have different regions that are connected, and the way they are...
What? Okay, so the idea is that other countries don't have different regions that are connected? Like...
held together is through developing together. That's why China invented the world's first civil service examination. And that's why...
that I don't know that actually follows.
China developed a language to connect the peoples of all the different regions.
Except that's also just wrong, because the thing is, China is an extremely multilingual society. Yeah, there is one dominant language that has not always been the dominant language. There's been other dominant languages within China at different periods. Like, I mean, what he's saying here is just fucking nonsense.
Mandarin. And you can talk about in Russia, the history of Russia. Watch the movie Ivan the Terrible, and you'll learn about a czar.
Just watch the fucking movie. Wow, this is just such an amazing revolutionary reading list. Just watch the movie, fuck it.
Who unified all the peoples of the Russian Empire. And as a result, was able to increase their living standards and raise the people up.
Which is interesting, because why is he called Ivan the Terrible then?
You can talk about this with the history of the Persian Empire. That there are many examples of civilization of the sea and civilization of the land.
Yeah, I mean, except that you're like examples of civilization of the land also have always had a strong emphasis on seafaring. In fact, to the extent that a lot of the time their like imperial grand strategy has been centered around it.
Civilizations of the land tend to have a more collectivist way of being, and they tend to encourage development as a way of holding great regions and nationalities and tribes and religious groups together. They must find common economic interest in order to stay together.
Except that doesn't work that way. I mean, what common... Like, let's just remember, he was giving Imperial Russia just now, during the feudal period. You trying to say that there was a common economic interest between the fucking serfdom and the handful of aristocratic ghouls?
as Atlanticism is about might makes right and rule by sheer force. And
I mean, like Russia spent much of the 19th century just in constant wars on the Caucasus. They specifically had the way that they actually ended up with as much territory as they had at the beginning of the 20th century was that they were also doing expansionist wars, specifically because they wanted to go south because they wanted fucking warm water ports, because the sea was important. This is why this is just such fucking nonsense.
These two trends, Atlanticism and Eurasianism, civilization of the sea, civilization of the land, they very much exist throughout history. All through.
Even his microphone is already sick of this shit.
All three of those approaches, the American system versus the English system of Henry Charles Carey, Lenin's theory of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and the geopolitical approach of Alexander Dugin.
It is not the geopolitical approach. It is a geopolitical approach, and it's one that is just fucking a hot mess.
Atlanticism and Eurasianism. All three of those approaches point to the same thing, which is that the global economy that we currently live under, which is centered around Wall Street and London, the Atlanticist, imperialist...
Putting London in there. Yeah, you see, he doesn't understand that London and the City of London are two different entities. The City of London is actually a completely separate political entity from London, as in the city that people know. The City of London is tiny. And in Britain, they say the city. But, of course, the reason he is bringing that up is because it's sort of a nod to LaRouche.
English system, British Empire, global order, this rule of the world by big banks and monopolies based in Western
Yeah, you mean... That's kind of... You're describing the Russian economy, too, there.
Is in a state of decay. And in revolt against it around the world, you have the Eurasian superpowers, Russia and China, that are rising up in alliance with Iran, in alliance with Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and many other countries that have broken out of the domination of the Western system.
They haven't. Venezuela very much has not broken out of the domination of the Western system. In fact, a lot of their problems are precisely because they did not succeed in breaking out of the domination of the Western system. It's why they basically had to hand over a lot of their, fucking oil reserves to U.S. companies. It's why their gold reserves overseas have just been, fair game for any ghoul who wants to have a go at it. They really have not succeeded in breaking free of it. They have, the starvation so-called sanctions have taken a major toll because they have not really broken out. And the thing about having, allies who are on the other side of the world is precisely that they aren't always a whole lot of help when you need them in order to, say, break through a U.S. naval blockade.
And as the Atlanticist system is collapsing, I argued, and it was actually me, this is my concept that I put forward first in this book.
Which is how you know probably he took it from somebody else.
Our City Builders, which was the first textbook of the Center for Political Innovation.
The Center for Political Innovation did not exist when he wrote this.
City Builders. I put forward the notion of the Atlanticist pathology. And the Atlanticist pathology is mental illness as a mechanism of social control.
Wait, what?
And we're going to be talking...
first of all, where the hell is he going? But how is this Atlanticist? All the Eurasianist countries do this bullshit taxonomy do this too.
Talking about the Atlanticist pathology tonight, because in order to stay on the revolutionary road, you must combat the Atlanticist pathology in yourself and in others. And there is an individual psychological, personal, spiritual journey that all of us have to embark on.
I mean, just look at the wonderful spiritual journey that fucking Caleb's been on, from getting kicked out of the Workers' World Party for being too reactionary to just sort of being a lone Nazgul ghoul to starting the first fucking Center for Political Innovation, and everybody left it because he was a sex pest and was like massively exploiting people. And then now he's on the second one.
If we wish to stay on the revolutionary road, and that means actively combating the Atlanticist pathology, because we live in a society where mental illness is being cultivated as a mechanism of social control. And
what do you mean?
Mental illness that is being cultivated is the Atlanticist pathology.
Wait. So the Atlanticist pathology is the pathology of cultivating mental illness as a mechanism of social control, and the mental illness in question that is being cultivated as a mechanism of social control is the Atlanticist pathology. So, I mean, his wonderful theoretical contribution is just eating its own asshole out.
So let's talk about this. 1888. Something happened that had never happened before in history. Right? We've always had murderers in history. Right? It's in the Bible, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder. People get mad at other people and kill them.
Interesting that he says thou shalt not murder, because that is actually the Jewish version of the commandment.
Right? Husband finds out the wife is cheating on him, goes and kills her, goes and kills the man she's cheating with. Somebody feels that somebody else stole from them, so they go.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we understand the concept of murdering people, Caleb.
Kill them. Somebody wants to rob somebody, so they go kill them and rob from them. Murder happens. It's one of the unfortunate aspects of human civilization. Crime, murder. However, in 1888, there was a type of murder that had never been seen anywhere in the world, and it happened in Whitechapel.
Okay, and first of all, I'm just curious, is that actually true? I have a feeling it's probably not. Yeah, he was not. I mean, what was new about Jack the Ripper was his media. I'm looking at the Jack the Ripper tour here, which, if anything, I mean, for marketing purposes, would want to call him, like, the first serial killer. He's not the first serial killer. Yeah, he was just the one who, like, there was a huge amount of media coverage. It was all over the newspapers. So we're already getting off to a great start here. If he's saying that this is, like,
which is a district in London. And it was...
Whitechapel, it's worth noting, is home to Freedom Press Books, which is a great anarchist bookshop. Well worth checking out. Hard to find.
Crimes that I believe they have finally identified the individual who did it, but there's still debate. But for a long time, these murders were widely unsolved. And they were...
I mean, what does widely unsolved mean? How does that work? Can you be, like, narrowly unsolved? What does that mean?
The murders of Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper was not his real name. We don't really know who he was.
Because it was widely unsolved.
Some people who say we do at this point, I think they have an individual picked out. They say it was definitely him, but there's still debate. And Jack the Ripper was the nickname that the press and the media and the police gave to this murderer in Whitechapel. Whitechapel was a district in...
Wait, now he's on another circle. First, it was the Atlanticist pathology. The Atlanticist pathology, remember, is the Atlanticist pathology. And now we're back to Whitechapel as a district in London.
London, where there were a lot of prostitutes. And there was a wealthy man, he was quite wealthy, named Jack the Ripper.
Wait, okay. We don't know who he is, but we know what his fucking bank statement looks like?
would go to Whitechapel and he would hire prostitutes. And instead of just having sex with them, he would cut them into pieces. He would violently murder them. Sorry to pick International Women's Day, talk about horrendous crime against women.
Yeah, I mean, that's very on brand for you, Caleb.
But here we go. Jack the Ripper was the world's first serial killer.
No, he wasn't. He literally was not.
And that kind of murder had never happened before in history.
Well, except that lots of that kind of murder had happened before in history.
People murdered people before, sure. People murdered women before. But Jack the Ripper was an individual who was sexually perverted to the point that the way he got himself off was killing women. And he would hire women as prostitutes, and he would mutilate their bodies.
Yeah, we've been seriously. He's in an endless loop.
Apparently,
here. He's in a causality loop, and just like 2 more minutes, like a starship piloted by Kelsey Grammer is gonna run into him.
He was a surgeon, all over again. Because he knew a lot about human anatomy. Based on what the police were able to deduce. I don't want to get into detail about this.
Yeah, I mean, but what's your fucking point,
R-rated. May not be the ideal stream to watch with your kids, but we'll get past this. The rest of
well, I mean, if you're watching this with your kids, I have to wonder why.
As gross and violent. But Jack the Ripper, he was a serial killer who murdered women for sexual gratification. That had never happened before. And the whole world...
This is like the 3rd time he said all of this.
Was like, what in the world? What in the world is going on in London?
And clearly it's the Atlanticist pathology, which is the Atlanticist pathology.
So the police of London immediately said that they wanted anyone who knew any information about Jack the Ripper to send them a letter. So
I mean, and one thing to keep in mind about serial killers, if you look at them, one of the things that really kind of shines through as a common thread is that they tend to murder people that the cops are kind of okay with being murdered. And that has a lot to do with why they end up getting away with it, because the cops actually aren't that bothered about it. Sometimes they will actually spend a long time denying that a serial killer is there's any kind of serial killing going on, just so they can avoid actually having any kind of pressure on them to investigate it properly.
The London Times, the Times of London, received thousands and thousands and thousands of letters from individuals claiming to be Jack the Ripper. Now, that was even weirder than the murder itself. It was weird enough. No one had ever committed horrendous crimes like this before. But then thousands of people sent letters to the Times of London saying that they were Jack the Ripper and describing how they had carried out the murders in lurid detail. And that showed that while there was, at this point, only one Jack the Ripper, there were thousands and thousands of people in Britain who were sexually turned on by what Jack the Ripper had done and fantasized about engaging in horrendous crimes against women this way. And that was certain...
I mean, this is kind of interesting because when you know that Caleb Maupin gets off by forcing women who he has power over to spank him.
Shocking. So Jack the Ripper, whoever he was, realized there were thousands and thousands of people stealing his thunder. So Jack the Ripper sent body parts from one of the women he murdered in the infamous From Hell letter. He signed a letter from Hell, Jack the Ripper, and he sent the body parts of women that were confirmed to actually be from the bodies that he killed. And so there was the infamous...
Which is weird. I mean, they couldn't really have confirmed that very definitively at the time.
This From Hell letter from actually Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper was the first one in 1888, but pretty soon there were more. And starting in the 1880s and the 1890s, all over the world, we started to see serial killers. Now, there had never been serial killers.
I mean, this is complete nonsense. What are you saying? See, the thing is, we did not have the term serial killer. The term that was used was repeat killer. And then, at a certain point, the terminology changed. So this is, like, actually a lot like when people will say there's been an explosion of autism, when actually what happened is the diagnostic criteria changed.
Before. But yet, for most of the 20th century, this was a very common occurrence. You have, Ted Bundy. You have Jeffrey Dahmer. You have these people who are turned on by murdering other people, usually women, and they commit these horrendous crimes. Now, in recent years, there's actually been a downturn in serial killers. We don't see it as much anymore. But what caused this kind of insanity, this kind of violent criminal insanity that had never existed before? Well, the British Empire.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, he is really making the false statement that this had never happened before do a lot of heavy lifting here. Because apparently, his entire fucking theory, such as it is based on the idea that there was never a serial killer before Jack the Ripper? Okay, there are all sorts of things you could tell me about Caleb Maupin that I hadn't heard, and I would totally not bat an eye. All kinds of weird shit. Because he's a weird little guy. But if you had told me that his entire theory of geopolitics hinges on Jack the Ripper being the first serial killer ever, I would not believe you.
At the time, was very much cultivating the population to be good imperialists. And they were actively changing their culture to make people effective imperialists.
I mean, let's remember, this is 1888. Britain had been doing imperialism for centuries by now. You know, they colonized Ireland, 700 years before. The Ulster Plantation was 200 years before. They'd been in India for like a century. North America, they'd been in for ages already. Like, why? So they're only just deciding to tell people to be good imperialists? It seems like they were pretty good at imperialism already, because the British Empire in the late 19th century was roughly as big as it ever got.
One of the things that they were doing was they were urging parents not to hug their children and not to give their children affection. The belief was that, especially for men, if you hugged little boys, if you gave little boys presents on their birthdays, if you were kind to
I think
little
we're
boys,
learning a lot
they would
about
be
Caleb right
weaklings.
now.
And so it was necessary to be cold with your children. That was the belief at the time. Furthermore, there was the introduction of violence in everyday life. Children were trained, especially boys, were trained to be military, and were trained to think about war and killing.
I mean, this again, we're not talking about new things here.
Constantly, there were violent punishments that were enacted.
Like, the British initiated triangular slave trade had come and gone by this point. You're telling me that that violence in everyday life was a new thing for Brits in 1888? What the fuck does this have to do with anything, by the way?
It became kind of, ritualized. In addition to that, there was a huge amount of sexual repression. Now, sexual repression is something that, traditional society generally does, but Victorian England was obsessive in the idea that if you masturbated, you would become crazy. They would cover up the feet of pianos with curtains, because they thought the feet of pianos looked like human feet, and people might be sexually turned on by the legs of pianos. The word leg, which is just a word for part of the human anatomy, was considered an obscene word.
What the hell? What does this have to do with anything? Like, is Caleb getting turned on by this?
Because you might be turned on by the word leg. So you were never supposed to say leg. You were supposed to.
Okay, which is really weird, because, and I almost feel compelled to call bullshit, because around this time, one sport that was really big is cricket, and the way you describe the field is divided into two sides relative to the batter, the off side and the leg side. And cricket was, in Victorian England, was huge. It was like, very much supposed to be a model for the way Victorian society was supposed to work. And they were saying leg all the time, because, like, half of the fielding positions had leg in the name. Square leg, deep, leg slip. There are tons of them. So I don't think that they were actually so strict about people not saying leg.
Say limb, right? And there was just a huge effort to crack down on anything sexual in society. Just a huge, huge amount of sexual repression. So if you combine...
and also, this is supposed to be distinguishing the Atlanticist part of the world from Russia, and I don't see it. I mean, like, sexual repression is a huge thing under Putin's disposition.
And the lack of affection that you're giving children, with the constant obsession with war and violence, with ritual punishment being enacted. On top of that, if you have a huge amount of sexual repression, you're going to get people like Jack the Ripper and Victorian Atlanticist society.
It's really easy to say that when we don't know who he is and therefore really can only guess about his psychology.
Produced a form of insanity that had never been seen before.
Okay, and first of all, how are we how did insanity come into this? This is very Scientological. And second of all, again, it had been seen before, is the point.
And that was the rise of Jack the Ripper. And all through the 20th century, up into the 80s and 90s, serial killers were a thing. Serial killers are not a thing anymore.
But they are. I mean, there was just one. The cops were in denial about this guy because it was like young black women in Kansas City, just like a couple of years ago. The local black community had been reporting about, like, young women and girls who were disappearing off the streets and showing up dead, and they'd been saying it was a serial killer, and they were like desperately trying to get somebody to look into this, and the cops were just dismissing it until there was a survivor. A young woman actually managed to tell the tale, and they identified the guy. I mean, like, serial killers still happen. I mean, one thing that is true is that the cops really are very reluctant to acknowledge them, especially because they usually tend to target marginalized communities, as Jack the Ripper did.
That happens occasionally, but it's very rare. Now we have mass shootings. Mass shootings.
I mean, we still have serial killers, though. Like, and what the hell's this picture? Like, Jesus. This is his theory of geopolitics?
Have replaced serial killers as the new form of violent mental illness.
Except, so we're depoliticizing them. Never mind, I guess he would not want to draw attention to the fact that when you look at mass shooters, they overwhelmingly are connected to the far right. And that if you look at far right, like, foundational, like, political tracts of the modern far right, mass shootings are actually promoted as a way of bringing about the sort of chaos that you need in order to get your race war on.
From Atlanticist society. And mass shootings, I'd also never...
But, I mean, again, Atlanticist society... But the thing is, it's almost entirely the U.S. There have been a few exceptions to that, but it is overwhelmingly the U.S.
Really happened before. There was an incident where a school was bombed in the 1920s. The school was dynamited, and a number of children were killed.
I mean, if you count mass shootings, mass shootings are kind of how the U.S. was founded, though. Mass shootings of indigenous people. I mean, this country's done a lot of mass shootings.
But largely, you did not have this phenomenon of young men going to their school or going to a public place and taking out a gun and killing as many people as they possibly can.
And, I mean, what's interesting is that there has been a huge peak in that since the Turner Diaries were popularized. And the Turner Diaries very specifically suggest this sort of tactic. And the guys doing it overwhelmingly are connected to the far right, to the extent that the far right like to run interference and pretend that they're not.
With their gun. That had never happened before. So now we live in the age of we don't have serial killers,
but we do.
But we have mass shooters.
Like, this is fucking hell. This is his theory of geopolitics. I have to remind people. This is supposedly his theory of geopolitics. It hinges on the fact that serial killers began with Jack the Ripper and ended when mass shootings started. Neither statement is true, but apparently they are foundational to his ideology, which is an ideology of geopolitics. Like, what, Chad, did any of you think that this is where we were going?
We have mass shooters. And mass shooters, when they first started happening, were something that had never been seen before.
I mean, they had been seen before, just not in exactly this form.
And it originated in Western civilization, just like the British Empire gave us serial killers. The United States
The British Empire gave us serial killers.
has given the world mass shooters.
And again, it's worth noting, the United States has mostly given it to the United States.
Well, all of this is...
What do Atlanticists believe?
Is rooted in Atlanticism. And let's just talk about that briefly.
I was wondering when we were going to get to this, and it turns out we're going to get to this when the stream's almost over.
The Jack the Ripper serial killer types, these are men that to some degree or other are insecure in their masculinity. They feel...
You mean sort of like Caleb? I feel like he's telling us a lot right now. When you hear that this is the foundation of his fucking geopolitical theory, such as it is, I feel like he's telling us very many things, and maybe more than he intended to.
Have something to prove, and they feel that in order to prove their manhood or whatever, it is necessary to murder women, and to some degree.
I mean, it's worth noting, by no means only women. Largely women, but there are plenty of cases where it has been specifically men.
Brother, they are out of touch with their own sexuality. Their sexuality is...
And not all serial killers have had a distinct sexual element. Some of them have actually had a very distinct political element.
Become perverted in a way that the way that they feel sexual is to commit horrendous crimes against women. It's a really, really horrendous thing. Mass shooters, on the other hand...
I'm glad he cleared up that he finds serial killers horrendous.
And there's no evidence that mass shooters are sexualizing their crime.
I mean, there's all sorts of evidence that they are politicizing it.
But mass shooters are also, like serial killers, they are very, very much obsessed with violence, right?
Wow, I mean, that's such a deep analysis. Somebody who goes and takes a gun and opens up on a bunch of random people, and in some cases small children, is obsessed with violence. I'm glad we have the intellectual clarity of this great ideological leader in our time.
The catharsis or the thrill of violence, right? Serial killers are sexualizing it. Mass shooters, maybe they're not sexualizing it, but they're very obsessed with violence.
I mean, and with far-right politics like you are.
They're obsessed with violence, and they also are very insecure. Serial killers are generally...
I mean, it's weird. He keeps on describing these characteristics, and they're all things that you could definitely say about Caleb.
Insecure about their own manhood. In many cases, serial killers have been shown to have erectile dysfunction, and they feel they need to prove their masculinity by murdering. And mass shooters are generally people that are insecure, men that are insecure in their masculinity, and they feel they need to prove their masculinity by engaging in mass shootings. Now,
I mean, I'm not exactly surprised that he doesn't want to get into, like, the manifestos that these motherfuckers publish.
Kind of behavior, serial killers, and now mass shooters, this is insanity. Dangerous, violent insanity on a level that humanity has not really seen before, but it is tied in.
I mean, humanity has seen worse, actually.
In very much with the ideology that is espoused by the Atlanticist, globalist, imperialist system. So what does the Atlanticist, global imperialist system believe in?
And we got a Malthusianism, but it is now, I mean, just as we're finally getting to find out what the hell any of this has to do with anything, it is time to wrap up. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the stream. We certainly learned a lot of interesting things about Caleb Maupin and his buck-wild worldview. I thought I'd already I thought I knew more or less everything that I needed to know, but apparently it is weirder than I thought. If you enjoy the stream, please like, subscribe, and tell people about it who you think might be interested. And if you would like to support the stream and support my other projects like the Ines Alamo Translation Project and my comic that I'm apparently drawing, I would always very much appreciate it. I understand that a lot of people can't at the moment. It's a shitty time for everyone. But if you can and you would like to, there's a link in chat, and I always appreciate it. Have a good